most of the war. He had been a fighter pilot, German fighter pilot, and he spent most of the war in New Jersey, going into New York City on the weekend passes. We let our prisoners that were, I guess, reputable or whatever, go, and it was like, I guess they almost hated to come back to Germany, the way they were treated. But he spoke perfect English. But anyway, I asked him, what can I do about this colonel? And he told me, he said, there's one man in there, he was almost the smallest man in the whole group. In Germany, his title is Little Jesus. He was actually a first sergeant in the German army. So I brought him in and I said, are you willing to take charge if I give you that responsibility and hold you accountable to bring this group under to work the way they're supposed to? Yahoo! I later found out that he flattened that colonel, and when he took over, the colonel disappeared. He didn't show up for work anymore. But the Germans worked very hard after that, and it had a big impression on the Turkish labor guys. They, every time I went downtown, if they were hanging around in any of the stores or anything in downtown, and every time they saw me, they, damn! They were impressed that I solved the problem, I guess. I also got the privilege of doing a shakedown inspection of their entire barracks when our PX got raided and all the supplies disappeared out of the PX. So we started looking everywhere where it may have gone. I found out that I got the job to do the inspection here and there, but one of the sergeants said the former base commander was in charge of the NCO club. He was the manager of the NCO club. He had been a colonel in the German army, and he had been the base commander there now. So I went and talked to him, and he took me to the PX, and they had manholes where you couldn't see them, but they went right down to the central conduit. You could walk upright where all the electrical, and water, everything was in the big tunnels underneath to protect it from bombs and things of that nature. But you could walk upright. And this is where we found most of the PX supplies. They hadn't been able to get them off base yet. But it was very amusing to shake those Turkish guys. Gave me not a hard time. They just laughed at me when I did them. They had they cooked all their own meals. They had all their vegetables and food and things like that in there by their beds. Their commander had a doctorate from the University of Heidelberg. Even though he was Turkish, he spoke 3 or 4 different languages, but a very educated man. He was very easy to work with. Anyway, as my duties there, I started, anytime that we were going to get an alert that something was going to happen at the base, my infantry background and having graduated from infantry OCS got me officer of the guard every time something was going to happen. The only time we ever had any real problems when the East German bandit gang, who apparently someone had been stationed in Hanau, they knew how to break in at the old railway yard at the end of the runway and come on base. And we were alerted by the Criminal Investigation Division that they were coming, so we set up an ambush for them. And unfortunately, one of my MPs got trigger happy. When they got to the railway gate, he fired a shot over their head, and they just took off. But they didn't show up again after that. At that time, we had guards, in addition to the MPs, we had guards from either, they rotated them. We had a Polish contingent, we had a white Russian contingent, Cossacks, no East Germans. But they were rotated periodically so they wouldn't get too ingrained in the whatever goes on the base. the MPs, the first time I had Officer of the Guard, in Germany, they had their desk inside the guardhouse, about 9 feet off the ground, so if any prisoner, you were looking down on him. While I was sitting behind that desk, all of a sudden these 2 brown paws came up over the top of it. There's a big head right behind it. They had the biggest Great Dane I've ever seen in my life. He was a huge rascal. But once we started playing football, we had a leather tackling dummy. And that guy would come out to watch practice, but he adopted that tackling dummy. We could not use that tackling dummy. That was his pet. But while I was there, I did get to play on they had the A and B type leagues in Europe. Hanau was one of the smaller installations, so it was B. I got to play on that team. My coach was a ex-Wake Forest All-Southern tackle. He was at the engineering depot. We had a common team. But while I was playing there with him, he said, "Do you want to?" And my old coach at Wake Forest, his name was Lucy Stewart. He later was Appalachian's head coach, but he was the end coach at Maryland. He said, "I can get you a tryout with Maryland when you go back." Because at that time we had been notified, Congress had passed RR-1, which meant the end of the war that exists officially. And we were due to get out, all the second those of us who were Army of United States commissioned, we didn't have reserve commissions, or had to get out by October of 1948. Originally, but when they passed the end of the war, they moved it back 6 months, so we had to be out by April of 1948. And I think about 90% of the second lieutenants in Europe wanted to get out to go back to school, so they came around to all of us trying to get us to extend, whether it was 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever, because all of us wanted to get out, earlier the better. But anyway, I didn't choose to get out. I mean, stay in. I got out in April of '48. And we came back on another boat, the Callan, USS Callan. The Callan had a periodic motion. The ship went up, over, and then I had the privilege of being one of 3 officers that had to herd a little over 100 368, 368, 369 deserters, bad guys, back to the U.S. They were we had a sergeant, a captain, an OSS first lieutenant, and myself, and the sergeant. We hadn't been out of the port more than 24 hours, then the captain and the first lieutenant both got seasick. So the sergeant and I had that crew for the rest of them. But we ran out of 55-gallon drums because they were right in the prow and they got that whole motion. I kept from getting seasick, but every time I went down to inspect by running up to the top of the ship, the highest point I could find, breathe the freshest air I could find. It was tough. But they were as meek as lambs. They were so sick. When we got them to Brooklyn, we had no problems at all getting them off. The other interesting thing I had, being one of the junior officers, I got the privilege of inspecting what they were taking aboard the ship with them. I didn't make many wins at the ransom employment. I took some things from the colonels that they weren't supposed to have. War loot, you might call, but they had a whole list of things that I had to look for and turn in. And it made me kind of mad because they picked up some field glasses and some, of the German officers were swagger sticks and nice jeweled swagger sticks, things like that, that were very valuable. But when I turned them in to the transportation officers there, oh, I've been waiting for one of those. That made me a little bit sick to the stomach, I'll tell you. The other thing, I had to shake the troops down that I was going to be responsible for. Every one of them had been permitted to go to the PX to do a little purchasing, and they'd all loaded up with Aquabella. Aquabella shaving cream is full of alcohol. They intended to get a little buzz on while they were gone, I guess, but I made the Port of Hanover smell awfully nice. We emptied them all in the ditch. But it was a nice trip. When I got back to, we were mustered out of the Army in Fort Kilmer, New Jersey, and at that time I did accept a reserve commission. When I got back home, I was made executive officer of a light engineer equipment company in Salisbury. But then I went to Maryland when I initially went to summer school at Catawba College, picked up some coursework using the GI Bill. And in the fall, I went up to Maryland to see if I was going to make the team or not. And the coach was Jim Tatum, who later was Carolina's head coach. He interviewed me and he asked me a few questions. He said, what are you going to major in, Carter? And I said, physics. Carter, football players don't major in physics. Anyway, I got injured in the first game scrimmage, and they had freshman teams at that time. I was first team freshman, but I got injured and was going to be on crutches for about 6 weeks. So I got permission to leave the team. We don't need you anymore unless you can play. Anyway, at that time I decided I'd been talked to a couple of times by some of my senior officers that you ought to take an exam for West Point. I wasn't interested at that time, but once I left Maryland, I said, well, maybe I better ought to try it. And I found out from my dad that the congressman that was responsible for our area was Farmer Bob Doughton from Surrey County. Farmer Bob was the #1 representative in the House. He was the ranking representative, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. And I was told if I wanted to talk to him, I'd better go in and see him at 6 o'clock in the morning. He was still going to work like he was a farmer. But I did. And the man was very impressive. He looked like he was about 6 feet 6 inches tall, a big man. His ears stuck out at right angle, and he was bald-headed, and he was deaf. We had shouted at each other for about an hour, but he had already made his principal and first alternate appointments to West Point, and he gave me a second alternate. But anyway, when I went through all the tests that I went back to home, took some more courses at Catawba, and then when it came time to take exams at West Point, we went to Raleigh for those tests. I think it was at North Carolina State, I can't remember. I know it was one of the better gyms here in town. And took both the written and the physical exams, and as it turned out, I was the only one that passed all his appointments. But when I was examined orally by the board, the colonel told me when he looked at my record, he said, you're going to go one way or the other. You'll get a superintendent's appointment if you don't get congressional. But that didn't turn necessary. I was the only one that passed all the exams. What that did later on when I was a cadet, Colonel Bob was also on the board of visitors of West Point, which means both as the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, he was the one responsible for making sure the service academies were funded, and he was very important to West Point. So as a plebe, I I was told to escort him when it was necessary and be very appreciative of what he had done for me, which naturally I did. But he must have kept West Point fully funded. They, as far as with the cadet concerned, we didn't see any problem. West Point at that time was an engineering school. Your curriculum was totally engineering. Today you've got 30 different curriculums you can follow. West Point still sits in the national scheme there in the top 5 liberal arts colleges in the U.S., public universities, in the top 10 in engineering. But liberal arts was not part of our curriculum too much. When I took the graduate record exam, I did great in the sciences and math, but in written and oral expression, I think I was about in the 45th percentile. I wasn't too sharp that way at that time. The time I was at West Point, I was, because there were, I think there were 14 of us who had been in the Army and commission status in the class with me. When we went through training they put you pretty much in leadership position, because most of us were older than the first classmen that were who gone into West Point at 18 and 19 years old. We could enter up until the time we were 22 years old. So there were 14 of us that were pretty senior age-wise. That did reflect in our ability and our aptitude for military service. It reflected all the way through West Point. Most of us were in pretty senior positions when we were cadets. I was ranked anywhere from 2 to 4. 4 years I was there in military aptitude. I ended up being the ranking battalion commander. They had 2 regimental commanders and the first captain, and then Carter. All that meant is that when they were out of wherever they were supposed to be, if they were away from West Point or whatever, I was the one that was in charge of the Corps at that time. And then graduation dinner, the Commandant of Cadets was my guest. He found out that a few of us had been commissioned before. He said, you mean you're going to have to go through another 3 years as a second lieutenant? And anyway, after that, his name was Michaelis. He came in to West Point as a commandant in the cadets while I was he reported in when I was in charge of Camp Butler for the summer training of the yearlings, the sophomores. And when he came in, I had to take him on a tour of Camp Buckner and all the activities that were going on. And the armor training was was a colonel who had been one of Patton's point men. And of course he had ribbons up his ear. I don't know whether you ever remember the name Michaelis. He had a correspondent who was quite close to him while he was in Korea. In fact, she followed him around on the battlefield. Created a little bit of a stink, but he had everything from a DSC to multiple silver stars. Anyway, so did this colonel. Now, I think he was either a Clemson or a Citadel graduate. I'm not sure which. He was one or the other. But when he was teaching the armor class, he would start the class with, "Beat Russia!" Of course, General Patton was the one who wanted to keep the war going and go after the Russians, not stop. But anyway, the 2 of them, that's all I could do to keep them laughing. They would look, see how many decorations they had. They were both pretty much equal in the amount of ribbons they had on them. I guess they wanted to be the top guy with the most decorations on base. I'm not sure. But anyway, it was unusual at that time. But they got along all right after that. But General Michaelis was able to get the Army to give us constructive credit for 1 year of commissioned service. So we only had to be second lieutenants for 1 year, which put us 6 months ahead of our class. When we graduated on June the 2nd. The class of 52 had graduated on June the 3rd in their year. That 1 year of credit put us ahead of the class of 52. And that was very important. Everything from housing to you name it, one day rank is the same as 1 year of 2 years. It made a lot of the class of 52 a little bit upset. But the guys that was in my class that were commissioned, we were in the second summer, we had already been through basic training and basic officers course, so we didn't need Camp Buckner training. And we were at Camp Buckner when we were called out, all 14 of us. And we were sent to Brooklyn Navy Yard and boarded the battleship Missouri with midshipmen. We got to sail with midshipmen all the way up to Halifax, Nova Scotia. I was the most popular guy on the ship among my guys because the bakery chef was a high school classmate of mine. So I had nights of cakes and ice cream and things like that to share. But there was an interesting tour. We went up to Halifax. We paraded with the Royal Naval Cadets in Halifax, and they were permitted to drink alcohol. The Canadians were. So we were privileged to be able to have beers and whatever in the officers' club after it was a hot day. So it was, that was a nice treat to be able to drink alcohol because the Canadians could. We went over to Durham, which is right across the bay from Halifax, Nova Scotia, on Sunday afternoon, just to sightsee. We had an ex-Navy guy who was a midshipman that we buddied with, Steve and I, and my roommate and I, excuse me. And we were walking down the street and people were inviting us into Sunday dinner and everything else. But about that time, Navy MPs showed up on the street. They were rounding everybody up that was supposed to be on board ship, or I had to go back aboard ship. The Missouri got his sailing orders to go to Korea. So they got us all back aboard, rounded up, and set sail as soon as they could. They dropped us off in Brooklyn, so we had a weekend and we kind of stretched it. We could go straight back to West Point. We spent the weekend in New York City, then went back. After I graduated, you could pick your branch depending on your class standing. My class still had to provide a third of its graduates to the Air Force at that time because the Air Force Academy didn't exist. But I chose to go infantry at that time. You know, I could have gone to any branch I wanted to because I wanted to go into the airborne. When I was in the Signal Corps, I wanted to go, but the Signal Corps said we don't need any paratroopers. So I got the privilege of going to the 82nd, the divisions. You could pick your division based on your class standing, and I chose the 82nd Airborne. Anyway, once you graduate, you go after your 30-day leave. After you graduate, you go to your branch training base, which at that time for the infantry was still Fort Benning. And you went through a lot of training courses, not only the basic officers course, but in between, because you were going to jump school and ranger school. There were different types in between, so they put you through a bunch of other schools, from mess officer school to motor pool officer school to, in my case, physical training school. And anyway, we spent pretty much of a year, a total year at Fort Benning, going through all those schools. I went through both Airborne and Ranger and reported to the 82nd after that. When we went through jump school, we were jumping at the T7 chute. T7 is the parabolic chute, which was fully deployed before you hit the end of the suspension line. It was like running into a wall from about 14 feet up when you hit there. But anyway, we were being supported in jump school by a Air Force Reserve unit out in New York. The previous week, they had supported a jump at Fort Bragg, and unfortunately, one of their planes had stalled out and cut through a platoon of paratroopers at Fort Bragg. When they supported us, instead of going across the DZ at 110 knots, they went over at 135 knots. I was the first one out of my plane on the first jump. My chute disintegrated. It just exploded. Two of the suspension lines snapped. It takes 2,000 pounds per square inch to snap a suspension line. It looks all the way around the camera, it'd be like 100 mice had been just chewing on it. You could walk through every panel without any problem whatsoever. It just exploded. So I got the privilege of popping my reserve with my first jump, as did a whole lot of the other guys. But we also were hurting here and there. Most of us had to put towels between our lift webs for the rest of the jump, because that jerk did a lot of bruising. We had a quick release box where all your harness connected to get out of it. You just pop it and you're free. But that quick release box was that opening shot, because they didn't let you. We had what was called a kit bag that you put your chute in, but in jump school you weren't permitted to use that kit bag. It folded over that box, so that box snapped up and just opened a lot of chins. I remember they wanted to look at my chute when I got on the ground real quick, so they pulled it up on a pulley right in front of the stands, and the stands were full of the wives. I wasn't married at the time, and the wives looked at me and, "See mine, see mine," because I was bloody. But most of us were the same way. But anyway, we got through that, went to Fort Bragg. I was platoon leader of, like this? Oh, I'm sorry. I was platoon leader of the platoon that got cut through in the jump. So most of the soldiers in it. It was an experimental communications platoon in the 325 Airborne Infantry Regiment. My Signal Corps background followed me there, so I was just right for that communication platoon. Is this static?
It's just a little too close to your mouth. Just a little, not that much. Take it, there you go. Well, that's probably good.
Thought I was getting feedback there. Can you hear me all right now? Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Anyway, that platoon was an experimental platoon, both in the equipment it had and whatever, so I got the privilege of being with it. But it wasn't shortly thereafter that I got notified that I was being considered to be an aide to Harry Truman's nephew, who just made Brigadier General, was the Deputy Commanding General of Fort McPherson. He wanted a First Lieutenant, Westpointer, Ranger, World War II veteran, unmarried. There were two of us in the Army. And my company commander had served under him in Korea. And he said, "You don't want to be that man's aide." So anyway, I said, "How am I going to get out of being considered for this?" He said, "Well, I got a order to provide a lieutenant to go to Fort Dix for airborne recruiting." The Corps commander wanted someone up there because the ones that were volunteering in basic training to go to jump school didn't end up going to the airborne units. They were disappearing in the system somehow. So anyway, Colonel Hoskins, who was my regimental commander, asked me if I wanted to go, and I said, yes, sir. I didn't want to be carrying groceries for General Truman's wife or whatever at that time. But anyway, I was sent to Fort Dix, and I hadn't been there very long, and they had a bachelorette dance at the Officers Club. We bachelors went there, and a bunch of buddies, and I spotted a very cute girl, very short. She was a great dancer. But, everybody had that attention. But I organized my buddies, and every time somebody cut in on me, they cut right back, and then I cut back on them. And eventually, they all gave up. They couldn't beat us. But I met my wife on June the 19th. We got married on July the 18th.
Wow.
It's either that or get killed driving over to Philadelphia every night. But oh yeah, she was a wonderful girl, lady. She was a surgical. I'm sorry. Anyway, she was a surgical nurse in Philadelphia at the Episcopal Hospital. There was one brain surgeon that wouldn't operate without her, so she must have been pretty sharp. We moved to Fort Dix. We had an apartment right on the end of the runway with the fighter jets going over every morning from the air base, rattling the building. I mean, they were more than, looked like about 20 feet over the top of the roof. But it was, she had some unique taste in furniture. She I didn't have any debt at that time. I even had $300 in the bank. So my car was paid for. I found out you go in debt pretty quick when you get married. Anyway, her tastes were unusual. We had a pink carpet in the living room, a blonde television set on from there. She couldn't cook. Our next door neighbor was a major and his wife was a great Italian cook. She took my wife under her tutorship and made a great cook out of her under objection. Anyway, we found out we were going to have a new one very shortly thereafter, and about the same time I got orders, we'd been married about 5 months at that time. Then I got orders to go to Iran with the first training team that went to train in the Iranian army. And I went in to see my branch officer in the infantry, the assigned lieutenants. I said, can't you delay it until my baby comes? And he said, Lieutenant, my wife had 3 children during World War II, and she didn't have any problem whatsoever. So I went to Iran in January of 1955. We were the first training team. The Shah had been returned to power in May the 12th, 1954. And they had a MAG group there in Tehran. Initially, then they brought us into training teams in to train the units in the Iranian army. It was an interesting period. In the initial orientation, the MAG people that were there in Tehran worked a half a day in a day. They would then go play poker at the officers' club or play golf or something like that. And in many cases, they didn't even wear their uniforms. But when they gave us our orientation as a team, we had a lieutenant colonel named Ryan who had been a World War II veteran. Half of his face had been shot away, but he was a great officer. Anyway, these colonels kept briefing us don't expect to accomplish anything the year you're here. Do as much as you can, relax and enjoy your tour. I hope I don't embarrass anybody, but Colonel Ryan, after it was over, there were 6 full colonels sitting up there briefing us. He said, "Gentlemen, take a deep breath, think of everything you've heard, and blow it out your ass." The faces on those colonels went from white to red. But he was a great team leader. But his team was to be centered in in Terrace. And we initially, the officers in the Iranian army did not train troops. They could be an officer if they were high school graduates, but they did not get involved with their hands dirty training troops. NCOs trained troops. So we put on some courses to train the trainers, and all they had was NCOs to work with. But in the break of some of that training, I was out watching rifle marksmanship instruction, and I saw a man with a guard walking along the path there, and he stopped and had his guard come get me. And it turned out it was Mr. Mosaday. Mr. Mosaday was the man who got removed from office by the CIA when they brought the Shah back. He was the one that got the Shah out of power. And he gave me a lecture on diplomacy that I'll never forget. He was a secular. He was not a hard and fast Muslim. He's wanted to bring the country back into the hands of the people. All the property in Iran was pretty much controlled, everything was controlled by 5 families. And he wanted to break that dynasty and bring the country back to the people. You got to remember that in Iran there was 3 different major groups. One of those groups spoke Turki, the others spoke Kurdi, and of course Farsi was the native language. The Shah, well, I'll give him credit for that, was trying the army into an education corps, trying to get a common language, at least within the army. He was teaching all the troops Farsi. The problem with that, the regiment I went to train on Sakaz, 1/3 were Kurds, 1/3 were Turks, and 1/3 was Persians. And they split equally in the rifle companies. They split them equally in those ethnic groups. And you'd have a sergeant get up, speak for whatever length of time, so you had 2/3 of the troops sleeping, and you had to get up at different times. But fortunately, the regimental commander there was a very sharp guy, a true soldier. He had fought in the 1948 war when the Russians tried to take over the province of Azerbaijan, big oil fields. They had recruited a Kurd and made him a brigadier general in their army, but he led the forces. And this colonel had been one of the true soldiers that fought in that.
You'll have to excuse me, sorry.
No problem. Anyway, I talked him into reorganizing the rifle companies, putting all of the native Persians in one, the Kurds in another, and the Turkish soldiers in another. What that turned out is that developed a lot of competition between the units. It got pretty interesting, that competition, when they got into the field. But after I got home, I found out that regiment was #1 in the Army training test, the first Army training test that they were put through. But the colonel was a real soldier. The problem with that is every night he was visiting me, he was trying to learn English. A lot of my time was tied up teaching him English. But they had so many problems there that about half the unit would be sick at any given time. And I couldn't figure out why, but when I inspected the mess hall with the colonel, I saw why immediately. They were cooking all their foods in these big kettles like they used to wash clothes in, I guess, big black kettles. But the top of it was totally dark, and that dark was nothing but hundreds of flies. The mess was totally open to the air. I was able to get them to screen off the mess hall where the food was cooked, and their sick rate went almost to the bottom after that. The Kurds we were in the area of the Kurds. Whether you realize or not, there was a Kurdish nation in 1948 briefly. It was headed by an Iranian army, a Navy admiral. His son was a graduate of St. Cyr, the French Military Academy, and also he had a master's degree from the American University in Beirut, Lebanon. They owned, I went to their home at dinner, and they had a home up on top of this mountain. And all the land you could see, but as far as you could look, was their land. But the Kurds were wonderful people. I hadn't been in Saqqez more than 24 hours when this retinue came in on white Arab horses with silver harnesses decorated on their horses. And I knew they must be pretty high-ranking Kurds, and he was the leader of the group. His particular group was actually armed by the Shah because they were loyal to him. And on the 12th of May, when we had a parade in Saqqez to honor the Shah's return, I got the privilege of being one of the reviewing officers with the colonel. Part of the reason my right shoulder is pretty much ruined. It was almost a continuous salute to hundreds of Kurds going by. But that was the horses they had. In Sinclair, I have some pictures. It's just incredible. As far as the eye could see along the river, right next to Saqqez, they had all their horses that they cleaned up. They were shining for the parade. But as far as the eye could see, it was nothing but Kurds and horses. But the group that was most obvious at the reviewing stand were the mullahs. The mullahs have a lot of power in Iran. They are the ones that can give, of course, they could have up to 5 extra wives, every one primary wife, but then they could have 5 more contract wives. The contracts were with the mullahs. But the mullahs were pretty much the power. I don't think they were too impressed with me being beside the colonel as the chief reviewing officer. That's obviously been their privilege in the past. Anyway, I've come to an hour here, haven't I? After that, just briefly, I went back to the U.S. You always go through a series of schools in between assignments. And when I went back to the U.S., I went through the communication officers course at Fort Benning. I kept having that tag of previous Signal Corps experience follow me wherever I went. But after that, I went back to the 82nd, was the company commander there, and during the time I was there, I talked my regimental commander, who was a Clemson graduate, to let me have command of a rifle company. I had command of the headquarters company, which was the biggest company, it had 300 men in it. But I finally got a rifle company, and the minute I did, the Corps commander, a gentleman by the name of Adams, said only captains could command companies, and I was the first lieutenant.